Foundational facts. You're not going to get small bump sensitivity out of this shock, even by running a 50-pound lighter spring. And don't forget, I winded the low speed compression to the full soft setting. I went as far as to change the damper oil. You need to accept this shock has a massive main piston that has a lot of friction. The problem is in the main piston, so check this out. It takes 54 total pounds of pressure to get this shock into its travel, killing its small bump sensitivity. No setup will cure the lack of small bump sensitivity, but not everyone is a small bump princess. The Fox DHX setup guide. I promise you, if you apply these techniques to this shock, you're gonna get better results.
Oh, it feels funny.
Now, this shock is heavily on sale at jensenusa.com. Check the first comment and get one if you're on a budget. But to be honest, it was a little bit disappointing. So we're going to talk about setup. So the internet is just absolutely and utterly obsessed with the low speed compression knob on this shock. So this is a 3D printed one that's on eBay for like $6. Linked in the description if you want to get one. But I did not have the best results with this one. If your DHX does not have a low speed compression knob, it does have it preset from your bike's manufacturer. I was able to wind it all the way into the softest setting with the low speed compression knob off eBay. If you have a DHX with no low speed compression knob, it does have about 50% of the low speed compression turned on from the factory. The problem with the 3D printed one is we end up with about 50 total turns of compression that's almost impossible to index and find the correct setting. The low speed compression obsession makes finding this stupid little knob pretty difficult, but if you look long and hard and pay a little extra, you can get one. Installing the actual low speed compression knob from Fox is really challenging. The parts are incredibly small. The springs were stuck together and it is like working on a watch. Tiny little pliers, a pick, and some grease, and this tip I'm about to show you. Conventional theory would tell you to push the knob straight on, as to not damage anything, but you have to put it on at a cocked angle in order to catch the detents on it. As you can see, it's kind of cocked, and then you're going to push the pins down, and it will go on, as long as it's crooked. And make sure you use some external grease to hold those pins inside the shock before you push it in. Here's a super important step. So this isn't a factory item, so we need to check our hack work. So what happened is basically the knob is installed in reverse. When I push it to the number 10 setting, that is the softest low speed compression setting. And when I put it to the 0 setting, that is the firmest setting. So anytime it reads above 50 pounds, you have low speed compression added. The next steps we do will greatly be affected if there's any low speed compression added. We want it in the softest setting. The DHX is like the trail shock, marketed for shorter travel bikes. The biggest shock is 230 by 65. These bikes typically have a more linear rear wheel path, so a progressive spring is required. To give you an example, if you want to add a DHX to your Stump Jumper Evo or your Specialized Levo, you have to add a progressive coil to it to make it work. So basically the windings are a little bit tighter on the bottom, so they have a higher spring rate. It's kind of effectively like adding tokens to an air shock. There's no external bottom out control on the DHX, so this is required. To give you another example, if you have a YT Capra, which my shock came off of, you may not need a progressive coil. So check this out. I usually say reach for the spring decks, it's your best bet, but you have to understand how Fox coil shocks work. They're kind of like unsupported with damping, and this one having no external bottom out control items like high speed compression, you need to be very cautious. Fox coils, or any coils, they don't break during normal riding. They only break during 90% or more bottom out. So if you want to prevent this, you need to skip the spring decks because it is not progressive enough even for my 180mm travel downhill bike. I have DVO progressive coils. They bolt straight into the Fox shock. I think you need an adapter to run the Cane Creek, and that's probably the most common progressive coil you'll find. It's time to put the coil on the bike, but we need to go to tftune.com and get a spring rate. This is the best spring calculator on the internet. I'll be running the 525 to 650 pound DVO coil. This spring is too light for me, but I'll show you a trick. Once the collar contacts the spring, take a 2mm Allen key and do full rotations. Every full rotation will add 25 pounds of spring force, so I'm going to do 2 full rotations. The tftune calculator said I needed a 570 pound spring. Adding 2 full rotations will bring me to 570. Set the rebound before you put it on the bike, because it's a little bit difficult to turn this rebound knob. If you happen to have a 2mm Allen key, it does slot right in there. It is a little bit difficult to detect the clicks. So I do have a tip here. So we open the FloatX setup guide. The PSI roughly correlates to pounds. Like I'm 220 pounds and I run 4 clicks on the FloatX. The rebound tune is a little bit faster on the DHX, so I did end up with about 2 clicks from fully slow. It is very important to use all the information you possibly can, like ask a friend, look on forums, watch my video, and open the Fox setup guide. We don't get much from the DHX, but it does recommend us 30% sag, which is very important to follow because Fox does a lot of testing on these. Now mount the DHX up to your bike, and you need to jump on the spring to make sure it settles. You really do need to measure the sag, and remember our setup guide recommended 30% sag, so I'm using a dial caliper around the coil spring to make sure it's close. And it is a little bit too much sagged in, so it's not going to ride good. Now there's always times when you don't have the measuring tools, so if you just eyeball the distance from the bump stop up to the shock, you can get it pretty darn close. Once the coil is mounted on the bike, all you have to do is turn this in the clockwise or counterclockwise direction to tighten the spring up. Now we need to double check. I'm very close to 30%, so I'm more confident in this setup. Fox suspension is precision. If you're unable to do these steps, you need to buy a RockShox because RockShox is more tolerant of bad setup. Before hitting the trail, ride on the pavement. Move your low speed compression adjuster to the fully firm setting and then jump on the bike. And then you're going to move it to the fully soft setting and jump on the bike. It is a very hard adjustment to feel and it can make a really big difference. You need to exercise extreme caution on any coil shock, but especially Fox coil shocks. So your first test should be a mild huck to flat and see how it felt. If it felt like a sharp bottom out, you need to stop and make an adjustment for more bottom out resistance. Mine felt great, so I carried on. Remember, I have that progressive spring, 525 to 650. The most important thing when setting up suspension, you have to take a small section of trail that you like and make sure it's absolutely repeatable. If you ask an old timer, they will tell you set your rebound first on the trail, boy. But like I told you, the bottom out control is the absolute most important thing to set first. The out of the box rebound tune is pretty quick on the DHX. It is a safe starting point to put it in the fully dead slow position and move it 1 click faster at a time on your repeatable section of track that's moving at high speed, regardless of the fact that it's called a low speed compression adjuster. I couldn't find much difference between fully slow and 2 clicks faster, so I just left it on 2 clicks faster. The final adjustment for your DHX is the low speed compression, the notorious knob on the internet. So start in the fully soft setting, adding 2 clicks at a time on your repeatable test track.
So I did not like this shock in the number 5 setting. Where's 1, 2.
The difference between 5 clicks and almost crashing and 2 was wild. I was like, wow, it really did make it a better shock. Low speed compression It is like putting salt on your eggs. High-speed compression is like pepper on your eggs. The DHX is missing pepper, so it's really not that great of a shock. But you put just the right amount of salt on, or low-speed compression on, and it is definitely enhanced. Just like salt and pepper, it's completely optional. Like the Fox DHX, I have no problem not having a low-speed compression adjuster on that shock. Setting up your suspension can really be challenging, so it's important to be in a good mood, full of energy, and listening to some good tunes. During the making of this video, I was like, how is that setup going to convert in gnarly, chunky, technical rock garden style of trails? I was pleasantly surprised to report that setting up your suspension for pounding blue flow trails works great on nasty rock gardens. I would personally set my suspension up for my favorite style of trail, but remember, blue flow trails are the hardest to get your suspension set up in because you need to build the perfect amount of progression and have the perfect rebound. The performance of the DHX in the chunky, rocky tech trails is really good. It lacks small bump sensitivity. Now the real deal breaker for me personally is this shock kind of sucks on blue flow trails. The DHX is a better shock. So if you're frustrated by the DHX and you want to go Coil, click this video on your screen because this shock is cheap and really impressive. Massive steel stanchion and a huge piggyback.